Okay, so let's dig into a story that is just fantastic. It's all about a simple observation that completely flipped our understanding of the planet on its head. It all kicks off with this strange ancient puzzle that, once it was solved, kind of revealed the secret history of the world itself.
I mean, really think about that for a second. You're hiking way up high in the mountains, you're miles and miles from any coast. You crack open a rock, and inside is a seashell. How in the world did that get there? This one simple question, that's the key to our entire story today.
For most of human history, finding a seashell on a mountaintop wasn't really a clue to anything. It was just a thing, a curiosity. You know, a weird looking rock, an oddity, but definitely not a piece of a puzzle. Yeah, maybe it was just a strange pattern that happened to look like a shell. Or, hey, maybe it was something magical. But it for sure wasn't seen as a clue to the planet's past. People would just find a shell up there, shrug, and move on.
But then, one thinker, all the way back 2,500 years ago, refused to just shrug it off. He looked at that exact same seashell and didn't see a random object. He saw evidence. He saw a story, a deep, ancient history of the world, literally written in stone.
So who was this ancient detective who managed to crack one of Earth's biggest secrets? Well, his name was Xenophanes of Colophon. You have to understand, Xenophanes lived during this incredible, explosive period called the Ionian Enlightenment. This was a time in ancient Greece when people started asking rational questions about the natural world, trying to move away from explaining everything with myths. He was right in the middle of this huge intellectual revolution.
And this guy, he was a natural-born skeptic. He was already well known for challenging the comfortable ideas of his time, especially this popular belief that the gods looked and acted just like petty humans. So this habit of questioning what seems obvious, it was about to serve him really, really well. And this is where we get to his huge breakthrough. It all started with that simple but incredibly powerful observation we talked about.
So according to writers who came after him, Xenophanes was paying really close attention to these fossils he found way inland. Now, the key phrase here is in the midst of Earth and in mountains. He wasn't just finding them lying on the ground, he was seeing them embedded inside the solid rock. This right here, this is the whole game. The jump from seeing an interesting object to seeing evidence of a past event is a massive, massive intellectual leap. It's really the birth of thinking like a scientist. He didn't just say, that's weird. He asked the much deeper question, what does this mean?
And by doing that, he basically pioneered a concept we now call geological inference. This is the absolute bedrock of modern geology, using clues you find in the present to figure out what a place was like millions of years in the past. Xenophanes was doing this over 2,000 years before it was a formal science. It's incredible.
So what was his final conclusion? It was absolutely revolutionary. The only logical explanation was that the sea must have once covered the very land where those mountains now stood. This implies something staggering for his time. The Earth is not fixed. It's not eternal. It has a history of profound, massive changes. And you have to realize this wasn't just a new idea about some rocks. This represented a whole new way of understanding the world. So before thinkers like Xenophanes, you explained the world with myths, stories of gods, and magic. And those stories usually assumed the world was pretty much made just as we see it today. Xenophanes was pushing for something totally different, that you can explain the world by looking at physical processes, at cause and effect, and that these processes happen over enormous stretches of time. Okay, so it's really important to add a little historical context here. Xenophanes wasn't a modern geologist in a lab coat, you know? He wasn't publishing scientific papers. In fact, we only know his ideas because other writers talked about them later. He didn't have a complete theory of plate tectonics or anything like that. So a much more accurate way to look at him is as a foundational figure. He was one of the very first people we know of who used fossil evidence to actually reason about the Earth's past. He took that critical first step. He kicked the whole thing off. So what's the big takeaway from this 2,500-year-old story? What is the real power behind his incredible discovery? Well, it really boils down to this simple, repeatable method. First, you notice something that just doesn't quite fit. Second, you fight that urge to just dismiss it or call it weird. Third, You ask that incredibly powerful question, what does this imply? And finally, you just follow the evidence wherever it leads you. This is the core habit of all scientific curiosity. And that's what makes Xenophanes so inspiring, right? He shows us that science doesn't always need a fancy laboratory or complex equipment. It can start with anybody, anywhere, just by looking closely at the world and refusing to take the easy answer. It all starts with the simple act of being curious. So, the next time you see something that seems a little out of place, a weird rock, an unusual pattern in the dirt, some odd feature in the landscape, don't just walk by. Stop for a second and ask the same question Xenophanes asked 2,500 years ago. What story is this trying to tell me?